Hello, Team Basecamp. Hey, Coach Tim here with a quick review of today's sweet spot intervals. Remember, in cycle 3, I'm going to be doing a more advanced review using WKO, and Namrita in the evenings, afternoons, will be doing the Training Peaks review. So everybody's going to get a little of both. It would probably be better if they were in the other order, but that's what you get. Okay, I'm going to keep this simple in WKO and start out. I did a little of this. I did one review before with some fundamentals. I have gone in and I can see the workout here. I've selected the workout in the left-hand Explorer by pushing workouts, and I'm looking at the left-hand Explorer. I can look at power, cadence, speed, heart rate, speed sensor, elevation. I can look at different reports. I'm hiding some of those when I hover over. I can look at a little data summary, but in this ride summary, I can also look at, we used to call this lanes, like individualizing. So here I see power standalone, cadence standalone, speed standalone, heart rate standalone. Of course, I have a little bit of map down here in the bottom, and I can look at some summary metrics like average. So this athlete's average heart rate was 134 beats and her peak was 154. Speed 1931, cadence 86, 102, power 124, 191. So I get a pretty good dashboard view of the metrics. Now you can drag and drop over intervals and stuff like that. I've already done that here, and I marked up two intervals that I named SST number 1 and SST number 2, and I've saved them in the system. So the way instead of searching around, I was just searching. This is the right-hand Explorer where we control time. When I make intervals, you'll notice if I click here, I have all ranges, but I also have user ranges, ones that I've created. If I click that, you'll see I always have a pinned entire workout, so I've pinned it up top. But then I have SST1 and SST2. Now you notice when I select SST1, it highlights, it drills right into that interval. You may or may not want to see your charts in that zoom function. So let's say you want to see it more highlighted in the whole workout. Drop down, configure this chart, and notice here time ranges. So ranges, I can zoom them and overlap, zoom and separate, or I can highlight. If I click highlight, I can now select a range and I see it within the workout. So it really depends on what you like to look at. In my custom charts, this is my PC. I actually do my work on my Mac. I have two charts like this. The top one is always highlight, so I can see where it happens, and the bottom one is zoom, so then I can zoom into the interval. I'll show that in a future showing and set this up better. Now, what I really wanted to show you is when I select, so I'm selecting SST number 1, I can see the summary data. It was 15 minutes long, 5.3 miles, normalized power was 149, average power was 149, cadence was 88. You get it. But a lot of times we want to compare intervals. So WKO has a robust compare mode. I'm taking my finger, I'm holding down the control button, I am selecting SST number 2. Now you notice they both highlight here, they both highlight in the workout, and now I can see both intervals stacked. Remember what I showed you, it said overlap or separate, and I chose overlap. I'm looking at these overlapped, separated. So I'm seeing one interval and then the next interval. Now, these were pretty darn similar. They should have been, correct? We were on a pretty flat course in Swift. We're executing under a pretty controlled environment. We would expect them to be similar. 15 minutes long, same distance, a little more climbing in the first one than the second one. Second one was a little bit harder. We can see here by IF. Remember, 90% of the effort was about the goal. She looks to be spot on, maybe a little below, but we'll talk about that in a moment. 149 watts in the first one, 150 watts in the second one. So these were executed. When I see this as very good control, very good control. And what a lot of times I'm looking at in an interval is intervals not to be ragged. Now, don't get me wrong, we're going out and doing, 6 times 3 minutes at all out max. Those are ragged. That's just by nature. But when we're doing sweet spot and tempo, the number one thing I want to see The first way my brain worked is, was that athlete in control? Because if you're really fighting for the power, you're probably not. We talked a lot today in our workout about feeling sweet spot. You might be just overreaching a little bit, and it could just be 5 watts. But I see good control here. When I compare the heart rate, there was a change, right? We saw pretty similar numbers, but she had about 5 beats higher. Somebody asked me in a workout, like, in the middle of the effort, would you target heart rate? No, at best. And remember this quote, because it's true, and you can believe it or not. At best, heart rate is redundant, but typically it's actually misleading. You could have taken 100 of us in the room, and my room was 35 degrees. Somebody else's room might have been 85 degrees. Our heart rate variations would be a broad string simply based on temperature of the room we're sitting in. No real output or relationship to our effort. So I use heart rate more in a trailing way. I want to look and understand the universe of what happened here, and then I'm going to decide on how it worked. Now I can use that dual selection process. I can scroll down and I can look at execution. Here's in the green, it's hard to see on the screen, but the interval 1 is yellow, interval 2 is green, and I can look and I see like some odd variation happened in here on interval number 1, some power loss, maybe overshifting, something like that. I can see, remember, the way we did these intervals, 5 minutes, high cadence, then a slightly lower power, low cadence middle, then a higher power, high cadence finish. You can see that interval 1 and 2, in the first interval, she wasn't as low cadence. She was struggling to find that incline mode cadence a little bit and was off. But look, by interval 2, she nailed it. So here's a great way you see improvement in the execution of what was posted, what was the prescription of the workout. And you can scroll down. I'm not going to worry about speed. It's indoors and it's wonky. Heart rate, we can see that across the board, her heart rate was a little higher in the second one. So that's strain. Remember, power is a quantitative measurement of the stress we're putting on the system, you being the system, and heart rate is giving us insight into the strain that was being put on the system. So with that said, I'm going to deselect my ranges. I'm going to go back and I'm just going to go back to entire workout, and I'm going to start clicking through some of the elements here. So I want to understand first training impact. What system was this impacting? When I look at a score of 1 to 10, and training impact scores, TIS, training impact scores on a scale of 1 to 10, but really it's just 3, high, medium, low. When Kevin and I created this, and we didn't just create it, we actually did it with the USOC, with their exercise physiologist team. Dean and Lindsay designed this with us. We really only saw like low, medium, high. But I'll be very honest with everybody. It's hard to get people to only see 3 numbers. They don't think it's robust enough, but it is. So if you're like 1, 2, 3, 4, that's a low. If you're kind of, where did I leave off? 5, 6, 7, that's a medium. If you're 8, 9, 10, that's a high. So this was a moderate anaerobic and a lower aerobic workout. And at first you might be like, Tim, we talked about this was a building of aerobic capacity, but this was a 1-hour workout with a significant amount of time, 3 fast pedals and 2 times 15 minutes up just below threshold, which means a high percentage of your work was coming anaerobically. When you get to about 85% of threshold, that's where, even a little lower, your anaerobic, the percentage of energy you're making anaerobically is getting pretty high. It's more than your fats and stuff like that. Now, I've had this question before. You're always burning, always making aerobic and anaerobic effort. I think Brian asked me this question at one point, and I can't even remember what I said that posed this question. You're always making both. The difference is, when does one start to dominate? Your anaerobic system starts to dominate around 85% of threshold. It's dominating up to and at about 100% of threshold, that dominance, you're making so much anaerobic energy, you're spinning off byproducts that your body threshold can no longer deal with when over threshold. So you'll fatigue quickly. Now, that tells us that a 6-3, a low medium kind of workout, low aerobic, medium anaerobic, But be careful about separating those numbers because just like you make energy, it's a mixed bag. So this is a very versatile workout. Like if I was to see this type, I immediately 6 and 3. That's metabolic versatility is one of the things that's happening here. And you're a lot of time in this purple zone. If you look at time here, blue is, and these are 1 second recordings, is aerobic, red is anaerobic, purple is where we're mixing those two. That is a versatile zone. That means you're making a lot of both fuel and you're mixing it up pretty well in the system. That does improve our ability to have metabolic versatility. It actually has some other positive downstream impacts like muscle glycogen storage and some other factors. Now I can scroll down and look at the impact. We've talked about this before. She wasn't using that much anaerobic energy, but yet she consistently used anaerobic energy. This is a little hard to see in the scaling, but you can see it's a little down. We do the fast pedals. It's just starting to come back and fully restore. Now look what's happening in the 20 minutes. She's burning it down. She goes a little harder in here, right? That's the thing about sweet spot. You're just under threshold. You're already right. You're already using a fair amount of anaerobic energy. It really starts taking over at 85% of FTP. So when you're going 90, it's already high. You're already wearing it down a little bit. And then suddenly you start going 95 or a little over threshold. Note the threshold line. It burns down that anaerobic side, and she fatigued. She had to slow down a little bit. That's the Icarus event. Sweet spot is when you can fly too close to the sun because you're already running just at that level. And sweet spot is the most disciplined of efforts. And look, you need to feel it. You might have been having a good day. This was an excellent execution because she was feeling it. And then she was like, yeah, maybe I'm wrong. She went back down. That's what you should do. But physiologically, we can see what happened. She's getting some anaerobic contribution. And it's keeping her ticking along and feeling pretty good. She dropped off a little here, tried to make it up here, drew down that anaerobic energy. Remember, you have a limited amount of anaerobic energy. It's like a little battery. Once you drain it, it has to be recharged. She lightens up, starts letting it recharge. She's almost fully recovered again by the second interval. You can see a much better control. She executed this second interval much better on cadence. She's using some anaerobic energy. She's not like fully at no utilization here. She makes a little push in the end, burns it down. And it really is that reality that she's right in that mixed zone that's having a higher impact on her anaerobic capacity. And that's what we want. That's what sweet spot training is. Think about what I'm about to say. Sweet spot is just below threshold, because you get the same impulse, the same impact as FTP work, but because you're not going over threshold, you're not accumulating byproducts, you're not doing the micro trauma to your body, therefore you recover from sweet spot quicker and you can do more work in the sweet spot zone than you can in the threshold zone. So for a cycle or two, sweet spot is an excellent way to get all the advantages of FTP. Well, 99% of the advantages of FTP work with 20 to 30% less fatigue and damage. And physiologically, you're seeing it happen here. I look at this and I say, yep, mission accomplished. Check mark, move on. Now, look at some of this, and her model's not, this athlete's model's not fully upkept, so there's a little grayness. I need to download some new athletes and have them ready for these. Time and zone, I can look at a quick summary. In WKO, we can use conditional data. I can just look. She was slightly above. She was on target for duration. How much did this workout fatigue her? No rest needed. That doesn't mean she's not tired. It's just like she'll be ready to work out tomorrow. She doesn't need any extra days of rest or anything. What's the 7-day trends? I can look and dig in about time, TSS, whatever I want. Scrolling down, I love this view too. In my personal dashboard, I have this on my ride summary dashboard. I just like looking at the heat map. And you can see here, yellow, there's zone, here's your, dark yellow, let's call it. There's your sweet spot zone. So she was alternating in sweet spot, threshold, sweet spot, threshold. You see it now and you can see it together. So she was actually going a little harder than the target, And we can see that when I look at eye levels, she's got a little less time in sweet spot and more time in FTP. But again, this athlete's model is not, you can see it here. I took a look at her FTP. I made an estimate. It's probably more like 165 than 158. She just hasn't tested the model. So the model's not super accurate. But yours should be if you're using WKO and you can test it. So you can look at eye levels and see the impact of the power the way you displayed the power. So another great way to see it. Now, if I look at her, I was about to do it, her classic levels, we see tempo and FTP. Tempo plays a little better role, and we can see, still some time and threshold. I can look at percentages here because the classic role, sweet spot is in a training level. Here it is. So here I can look at sweet spot. She was 12 minutes. FTP, she was 15 minutes. So that's pretty much the work. That's 98% of where she was, a little bit of tempo in there. Now, just speeding it up, insight-wise, we can dig into this interval analysis. Now, if I really wanted to look at this deeply as intervals, all it is doing is summarizing. I'm not going to do that today. Actually, let's save that for the future. I do want to make a point about heart rate. So I get this question, how do I use heart rate so I wouldn't target or whatever? It's good post-analysis. I use the same process. So I'm going to go back to my user range. In sweet spot 1, I can see her uptick trend was 0.61 watts per beat per minute over the interval, and her average heart rate was 143, and I can see power at select heart rates. In the second interval, it's 0.51, 148, so they're different. I can see intersection points of trend and average being different. So I'm going to take my finger again. I'm going to hold down the control button. I'm going to select both intervals. Now I can see them overlaid. So in interval number 1, her trend, the slope of the uptick of her heart rate was 0.61. And in 2, it was 0.51. So the uptick was actually less in 2. It started higher. Remember, I showed you that, so I knew what it was going to say, because she wasn't fully recovered. So whereas, and I think her intervals were controlled, her intervals were controlled. We took a 5-minute break in between. I don't want you to be fully recovered. That's why we break things down into intervals. If her heart rate would have been a higher slope, a more active slope coming from the lower when we're doing sweet spot, I might have said, wow, she's resting too long in between intervals. I might shorten that to 4 minutes. Or maybe 3 minutes. That's the type of adjustment that looking at heart rate post-workout, not targeting by it, post-workout can help you make. Understanding slope and trend analysis is more important, because if you just looked at the numbers, you would say, well, her heart rate was higher on the second one. And I can look at, remember, the yellow is her heart rate, second interval, the red is the first interval. You can see the difference right from the get-go. There was a gap. But by understanding the uptick trend, you can actually see it here. She was higher earlier because she started higher. She started the second interval with a little fatigue. By the end, they were the same, less uptick trend. The overall second interval, she went a little harder. Remember, her power was a couple, 1 or 2 watts higher. But the change in stress from the beginning of the interval to the end, the change in strain from the beginning to the interval was less impactful. So if I saw that trend again, and I was doing this athlete, first thing I would do is make a longer interval progression. And then the second thing I would do is shorten the rest time in between. I want the second one to have a little bit, if I didn't see that rest. So I would lengthen the interval first. And then if she was starting and had the same trend lines for both, I would shorten the rest period in between. Hope that made sense. It's hard to do these. I got to rethink my game as far as doing reviews more complex. It isn't easy. That might bring about some questions. Please feel free to ask. Talk soon.